Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the AIM Growth Partners podcast. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Geoffrey Hill, the founder of Tutomantic, the experts in threat modeling and cybersecurity. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, David. Lovely to be here. We both know that even though we're on different continents, we're both roasting.
Exactly. It's a bloody hot day here in the UK, and from the sounds of it, it is with you in Vermont as well.
Yeah, we've got fans running all over the place right now. So
Lucky you. I haven't. But Jeff, for those of the listeners who don't already know who you are and aren't familiar with your work, let's begin with a bit of an introduction to yourself and the company, if that's okay.
sure. We were talking off the camera beforehand. We were talking about how I grew up on a farm and everything like that. So I have, in many ways, I have a lot of different perspective on things than a lot of other people who are my peers who got into cybersecurity. But I basically was a contractor for a long time, cybersecurity contractor in the London market for a long time, and kept running up against a bunch of obstacles when trying to do threat modeling. And threat modeling, how do you say it succinctly? Well, the elevator pitch for threat modeling is that imagine if we're all architects and we're building a building in an earthquake zone such as San Francisco, California. We wouldn't just build a building out of concrete. We'd actually make it so it's earthquake proof. We'd put in springs in the bottom. If we didn't, well, the building would fall. So threat modeling is kind of like that, building the springs in place, but for cybersecurity. So that's kind of like that's the easiest way I would say about it. Is essentially what you do is you look over what you want to build and you put in what you should put in before you build it, and you run into problems, and then you say, "Oh, I should have built that. I should have put that in." And so it's kind of a key point, which we'll get into probably a little bit later, but it's kind of a key point of development. AI changes things slightly, but they modify things. But you still have a situation where developers get together in the new way of doing, relatively new way of doing things, agile, and they'll get together and they'll decide upon a path or a plan to build a piece of software, which is user story and or higher levels epics. And then they'll go and they'll execute that plan. Now, during that planning session is where threat modeling comes in. And that's where I decided that they really need to put some kind of organization and methodology around the threat modeling. There are a lot of different threat modeling methodologies, and almost to a T, they're built for security people and not for the developers. It's like handing the keys of an F1 vehicle to just some guy who does streetcars. You're not going to come up with a good solution right there. So what you want to do is you want to get both the security guys and the guys on the ground involved. What I did was then, based upon some bitter experiences, I went back and I kind of looked at the whole thing. How can I simplify this? How can I make it so that your engineers can also get involved, who are more prevalent than your security people, and get them involved and get them to start doing threat modeling on their own? And hence the Tutomantic brand was born. We do three things: people, process, and technology. Funny enough, the people part is the training part. So we deliver training. In fact, I just delivered 2 days training yesterday to a group of avid young people, and hopefully they'll walk away with threat modeling like woohoo, like that. And the process part is we do consulting on how to integrate threat modeling in. I would say optimally, but how to do better work of integrating in threat modeling into your workflows, because most people screw that up. They'll just slap threat modeling in at one point. They'll put it in as a compliance measure, and then they'll get really pissed off when it doesn't work, and they'll never do it again. I'm like, well, okay, you could do better, and we can help you. And then finally, kind of the icing on the cake is the automation product that we have. It's a cloud-based product, API endpoint, and it speeds up everything because it can consume almost any kind of format that you do. Like you and I write on the back of a cocktail napkin, we could probably scan that and put that in, and bang, you get a threat model out of that. You and I sit down and we use something like Draw.io or Visio or Lucid Charts or Terraform or CloudFormation. Again, send it in, and we can create a threat model out of that. And that's the flexibility of the whole tool, is it uses your tools and allows you to recreate these tools or reformat these tools, these outputs as threat models.
So having been a contractor in the space then within cybersecurity, specifically focused on threat modeling, what did you see was the gap that was missing in the market? You said a lot of people kind of tag threat modeling on at random places and it's a compliance exercise.
Yeah.
What was it that you saw specifically that you could do different and you are now doing different at Tutomantic?
I think in the early days, everyone was doing threat modeling by hand, and it usually ended up being a screaming exercise. And that's why people stopped doing it. And I'm talking the really early days. I'm talking about 20 years ago. Is you get a bunch of people in a room, inevitably the room didn't have air conditioning because they never do. And you'd end up spending all day screaming at each other because people would come up with some crazy ideas. Like, what if the roof blew off and a bunch of commandos came down and took over our server rooms? Like that's okay, it could happen. The odds of it happening, pretty low. Don't put it in the threat model. The threat model is all about probabilities. It's about, that bell curve that you always look at. And so I got frustrated with people doing this and putting down these things. I got frustrated with people writing essays on the threats and then ignoring the mitigations, because the job for us isn't to find the threats, it's to find the mitigations. We need to get to the solution via the threats. We don't need to just stop in the threats, go like, my job is done. No, that's the pen tester. They're supposed to find the threats. You're supposed to find the counterbalance to that. So I got frustrated with that. I got frustrated with people kind of going off piste all the time and no organization in these meetings, and people screaming at each other and shouting at each other and having different methodologies, and also having different terms. And all of that was frustrating to me. And it seemed like a lot of the stuff you find out there is geared towards security folk. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but the problem is we're thin on the ground. And you must know this, David, from like doing plenty of interviews. Usually the security people or you might find a company where you have 65 engineers and 3 security people, and they're completely overworked. You actually want to add threat modeling to that? I'll give you an anecdote. And during the pandemic, we all get locked down. And thankfully, my wife was still pregnant with my child, so I didn't have a baby I had to look over at that point. But we're all locked down, and I'm working for a bank. And well, the bank offered me a contract, and they said, "Hey, how'd you like to be a threat model?" I'm like, "Hey, that's what I do. All right, excellent." They hired me, and I'm working away. And I said to them, first few days, I said, "Okay, well, who's my team? Whom do I have to interact with for the engineers?" And they said, "Oh no, you're not going to do that." I said, "What do you mean?" So you'll read their, you'll basically read their documentation and you'll create a threat model. I said, "That's not how it works. I can't possibly hope to become even close to even an expert or knowledgeable person about a system by just reading the documentation. I need to talk to people, and it needs to be a group exercise. I need to talk to the engineers and kind of bounce ideas off of them. That's what threat modeling is, to ask them what works and what won't work. Otherwise, I'll build a bunch of stuff in the threat model and they'll reject it all. I've been here beforehand, kind of thing." And the guy looked at me blankly and said, "Well, that's not how we do it at this bank." And then I said, "Okay, all right, fine, I'll do it your way." And then when he gave me the methodology, it was a really complex methodology that was gonna break down, because it involved all sorts of arcane things that you calculate numbers and you never reuse them, which I find to be pointless. You calculate risk values and all that stuff, and you never reuse them outside of the threat model. I said, "Well, what's the point of the threat model? It's a dead end." And then the other thing is, he said, "Yeah, you'll be in charge of some threat models." Okay, how many teams am I in charge of? He said, "Oh, give or take 160 teams." How can I possibly look over 160 teams? I can't possibly do this. And um, so basically, that's how I came about kind of rechanging things. And so basically, when I left that experience, I was very close to being quite bitter about the whole thing. And that propelled me to develop more into my threat modeling methodology. Simplify, standardize. I have 3 things in the mantra. It's like a consistent methodology, a repeatable methodology, and a methodology that you can measure. Because why the hell else are you going to do this? So something you can put back into metrics and put back into the system. Something where if I get output from this threat model, it'll be consistent with output from other threat models, and therefore we can measure across them. Something where if I tell you how to do threat modeling, you can go off and you can do a simplified form of it. That's the repeatable bit. If you can't do those 3, then the threat modeling to me is pointless. And that's like I said, that's where I came through, and we built up 3 product lines out of it. The main thing is the automation piece, but then around it we had to do consultancy, because you always have to do consultancy with these things. It's not, it's not some simple tool or anything like that. And then the other thing is also doing the training, which is quite popular too.
And was it always a deliberate choice? It sounds like you build up quite a holistic package there with the 3 different product offerings. Was it always your intention? You mentioned with the product you've got to offer consultancy. Was it
Yeah.
always the intention to tackle it from, people, process, and technology, tackle them in like separate?
No, it came together. The original idea was an automation product, and we built the automation product. In fact, we founded the company in 2015. Originally, I had a co-founder. He left and went off and did other things, and then I ended up carrying the flag forward. But the original idea was that we'd have an automation product that could consume any kind of input and produce a threat model. And it was I would say it was very far advanced for its time because everyone looked at me and said, "Well, do you have a drawing tool?" And I said, "No, I don't. That's not the purpose of the product." And people kind of looked at me funny and walked away. And a lot of people did. And there were a lot of, kind of the usual entrepreneurs list of things that can go wrong, went wrong and stuff like that. It's funny now because the rest of the market is now catching up to me. And now they're offering because what they're getting complaints about is people are saying, well, it's all fine and good that you offer a tool you can draw on. What about all my previous models I've created? I want to create Trump models out of it. Can you do it? And my competitors are saying, well, not easily. Oh, well, we have to kind of create an inner, we have to create some kind of a connection with it, a hook with it. Oh, we have to develop that. Oh, you've done it in this. So they don't do it out of the box, which I do, which my company does. Did we fall into the other things? It's the usual Microsoft thing. I worked for Microsoft for nearly a decade, and they had a consulting arm. And I always wonder, like, why the hell do you have a consulting arm? Now I know. Because when you give a product like this to people, they'll look at it and they'll say, look, it's a nail. Use a hammer. I'll say, well, it's not a nail, it's a screw. Oh, like that, that kind of thing. And they always try to do it in novel and interesting ways that you never anticipated. And that's why you need to have people to help out to say, look, this is the way you optimally put it into your workflow. And the training just kind of came out from that too, because I ended up telling people what the hell threat modeling was. Finally, I said, all right, fine, I'll build a training for it, that kind of thing.
Let's talk about the evolution of your business because I think it's such
Sure.
an interesting space, the cybersecurity market. And we spoke at the start of this call off air about, investment within cybersecurity. And I know it's been a bootstrap business. You've not
Yep.
taken external investment. Talk to me around the kind of the rationale behind that and, just the evolution of the business generally going down that bootstrap route.
Okay, so I guess the upsides of bootstrapping are that you're not beholden to any group of creditors or debtors or anything like that because you're completely running it lean and mean. And as a result, you can change a lot more quickly. You can change what they say on a dime. I don't know. They don't have that term over in the UK, but you can change very rapidly. And that's the benefit of being bootstrapped. The downsides, there are quite a few downsides of being bootstrapped, as you probably imagine, is we're being a cash business, we're constantly, you know, watching our numbers. And if we have if we have a lean month, then we have to look forward and we have to say, okay, we're gonna have to do less in these different things right here. And so I guess another benefit of bootstrapping is that we find ourselves being automated very quickly, highly automated. Everything has to be automated, streamlined, bring in AI into it, and then all of a sudden you find yourself being even more automated with agents and all that right there. So we're a very small, lean outfit that does a lot of things as a result of the bootstrapping. The downside is that we don't have the flashy campaigns. I think you and I were talking about our RSA. I don't have the booze, which have the games and stuff like that. We don't do it. We walk the floor. We talk to people and everything like that. We're a lot more, by the business. We do talks. So we'll either do training at events such as NullCon, and I've done DeepSec training also, or we do talks at different events, and we come forward and we kind of spread the word there. But we don't actually set up any booze because to me, it's just the ROI is terrible. If you don't have the money behind you, and it's strange because a lot of people say like, oh, just get your VCs to pay for it. I'm bootstrapped. I don't have VCs. We're running as a very lean operation. And so I kind of it's interesting because in some ways I'm glad to be bootstrapped. In other ways, I think wistfully about like, wouldn't it be nice to have a bunch of cash behind me to be able to do things? So it's a balance. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. You mentioned AI, so interested in kind of turning attention to, I think it's been an incredibly disruptive force and technology across all industries, but cyber
Yes.
particularly. And I think I wasn't at RSA this year, but was last year. And I know AI was sort of tacked on to pretty much every booth. You wonder how long before they kind of wondering where they can position AI in the business. But that was definitely, a focal point. Talk to me around the kind of the benefits, the good and bad with AI as it pertains to cybersecurity and your business.
Yeah. So my experience with AI, I mean, I'm working a lot now in the various AI with the AI engines and with agents and all that right there. So I always remember that the basics of AI is that it's a probability machine, and that what it does is it takes a series of your words, tokens, and then it tries to figure out what the next series of tokens are going to be. Probabilistically figures it. That's a very basic view of it. I mean, they've gotten a lot more sophisticated since then, obviously, but the basic idea is that if you talk to anything like, you talk to Grok or you talk to Gemini or any of those things, it basically comes out with stuff that it figures that you would be asking for. So if you give it a lot more dense description, it'll come out with a lot more specific output for you. And these have good and bad aspects. Obviously, the bad aspect would be hallucinations with AI. If they provide things that are completely untrue. In fact, I caught AI saying at one point, I asked AI to summarize my LinkedIn experience, and it said that I worked at Raytheon for 10 years. I've never worked at Raytheon. I don't know where I got it from. So you have to be careful about these things. In returns to my, and this shifts also to threat modeling. In the early days, I encountered a lot of people who said, "Oh, I'll just get a threat model off of AI. I'll just ask AI to do a threat model for X." And so that's all fine and good. But what I found out was it depended upon what you asked AI. To show it very simply, I could say, AI, give me a threat model for an S3 bucket, and it'll give you, a threat model. It'll output a bunch of stuff. And you can say, AI, I have an S3 bucket, and I'd really love to have a threat model for it. Now, to a human being, it's exactly the same thing. And like I said, I'm simplifying things, but to an AI, originally, it would come out completely different. And it still comes out different. The AI will give you a different set of outputs. And the problem is, comes back to the consistency bit. It's like I said, threat models need to be consistent, because if they're not consistent, how can you depend upon them? Because, you might on any given day at any given hour, and given a certain set of parameters you give it, not parameters, but like a certain way you describe it, something to an AI, which would be exactly the same way as other ways, but just differently worded, it'll come up with a different threat model. That's not consistency. And then therefore, how can you depend upon the veracity of that threat model? So we went back and we said, okay, well, how can we look at this? And how can we use AI to help us out? We can use AI in the front end to ease the process of creating the threat model. On the client end, so when they're in the stand-ups, the AI can actually help them as an agent that can actually sit there and say, "Hi, I'm your agent. I'll help you when you're in your stand-up creating the threat model." There's that point. On the back end, AI can help with collecting data. So in a free form, instead of us going out on a periodic way and collecting data and then bringing it back again, on the back end, the AI can go out and troll and find out if there's any new issues out there, any new situations, and pull them in. And then we can use those. So there are 2 points where AI can definitely help. AI can definitely help with the output. So it can tailor the output per what the people need. So if you, for example, David, let's say you just need a human readable report in a certain format, well, AI can do that without me having to create a whole bunch of code, without my company having to create a whole bunch of code. We've now created an agent which will do it all for us. And that's a huge benefit right there. From the point of view of doing the actual threat modeling, I'm still not confident that AI will come up, or that any of the agents or any of the different endpoints will come up with consistent threat models based upon a certain number of parameters. It seems like they always come up with something slightly different. And that to me then means that I can't totally trust it. Although there's an interesting thing. I was like, this one guy has been talking about it, a researcher, and he said, look, if you want to hone in and get a more specific way of doing things, hit a bunch of different AI endpoints, like hit Grok, hit Gemini, hit OpenAI, and maybe a bunch of lesser ones. Let's see, where the other ones would be, Claude, for example. Hit all those different AI endpoints and get a condensed or a conglomerate of what their output is, and you'll probably get a more accurate output. And I thought that's actually really good. Or could I maybe ask the same AI again and again and again, although I'd risk getting the same answer again and again. But if I got it from 5 or 6 different endpoints and then combined it together, I probably have a fairly accurate view. There's something that I think people don't understand is they say, wow, AI is so amazing. It's so intelligent. Yes, because AI has hoovered up all this information. It's like if you sat in a university, you were talking about, you going to university beforehand, or if I sat in university and all we did was sit in the library all day and consume information, and we somehow managed to retain all that information, we'd be like AI. Except for AI can do this immediately. AI can hoover up entire libraries. And it doesn't matter to it because it doesn't retain that as such as knowledge. It's stored in a different way. So of course it can produce highly accurate answers, potentially, or highly interesting answers. It can do something no human being can do, which is basically David becomes the population of the world in terms of its memory. You know what I mean? There's upsides and downsides to that, obviously, also, because you will get in AI, you'll get a spectrum of humanity, and not all human beings we know are good, and not all human beings are think the same way. Some are more selfish than others, et cetera, et cetera. And AI is going to take those and it's going to basically repeat those out there. Not that AI cares what selfishness is; it's just going to repeat this stuff. Think of AI as an intelligent parrot. Okay. And then you'll kind of be on your way there. But there are different areas that I say that AI can be used and can be worth, but doing the whole threat modeling, not comfortable with that yet.
Gotcha. And I guess that's probably a good thing for you as a business as well, because if it gets to the point where, you're getting kind of prompt engineers or people out there saying, hey, you don't need to be sort of paying for external threat modeling, just use this
Yeah.
prompt, chuck it in chat GPT and you're well on
Well,
your way. I guess that's probably the risk, isn't it?
it is a risk, and with prompt engineering, and I've actually used prompt engineering a lot. Prompt engineering is very powerful. Again, if we're talking about using one model, you're still going to probably run up against those issues that I was talking about. If you're talking about the AI coming back and being regular about the stuff, that's one thing AI is not great at, is being consistent in its answers. Any AI model. And so if you still continue to have some kind of consistency, you say, look, we're going to continue to use Stride, that kind of thing. We're not going to include other things, other methodologies, whatever like that. We're going to be consistent there. Then the model still works and people can trust the model. And I think the big thing in cybersecurity is trust. So if you get hallucinations in cybersecurity, that's not just bad, that can be terrible because you might be basing your assumptions upon something that's in the ether that doesn't exist. And this is a big challenge. And we looked at a lot of different things at RSA this year. And we asked a lot of people about that right there too. It's like, how do you minimize the chance of hallucinations when you're fully dependent upon AI? And many times the people gave me a bunch of sales gobbledygook, you know, what sales word salad? All right, I've heard that. You're not giving me a solution. You're not telling me how you go around getting around this because it is a real problem that happens. And this is where human beings will still excel. Is we still excel at the meta. And, it's getting now where a lot of the specific stuff AI can take over, can do well. Programming and a lot of different, like down and dirty stuff. And there are a lot of AI engines out there which can actually do some higher level thinking too. Well, but it's the prompting which gets them there. Here's a thought exercise, and I talked to a friend of mine, and it still exists. I think so, even with the latest AI iteration of OpenAI. He said to me, I said, one thing, like I said, the human beings are good at still is thinking out of the box. I said, what do you mean? He said, give me an example. I said, fine, an example. Galileo. When Galileo came on board, if you looked at all of the writing at that point in time, it all pointed to the fact that the Earth was the center of the universe. All the writing out there. So if you had an AI, it would hoover up all of that and it would tell you brilliant ways of why the Earth was the center of the universe or how Earth was this or how Earth was that, but it wouldn't give you anything that was outside of the box because that's all the summary of human understanding. What Galileo did is said, nah, I don't think it's the case. I think the sun is the center of the universe and we're all going around the sun. And he made a bunch of hypotheses, which turned out to be true. But because of that leap of faith, that jump that he did, that intuition he did, which AI is still not so great at, because AI will take and sum up a bunch of stuff and come up with things. But if it isn't there, AI won't find it. And that's why I said the whole thing about parrot, the very highly intelligent parrot.
It's interesting. That's such an interesting take, or such an interesting kind of insight of well, you mentioned all the good things it can do for kind of the business and automate things your end, but also like what its sort of limitations are. And maybe people are quite blind to the limitations sometimes when it comes to AI.
Well, yeah, and people ascribe to AI all sorts of wacky things, and I say it's just an engine. It's not Terminator 4, at least not yet, not Judgment Day. It's not the situation where you always hear these things. I mean, I'm sure you're reading about like, I dumped my boyfriend for AI or dumped my girlfriend for AI. I say, okay, you've really got to get out more. Here's a prediction that I'm pretty much I'll be 100% on. I'm sure about AI, and it's let's say a side effect of AI is you'll probably end up seeing people meeting more and more in person as AI gets more and more advanced. The reason being is this particular situation we're in, videos going back and forth. What's to stop in the future from both of us being AI generated humans with AI generated voices that replicate us? Nothing. So at that point in time, the human still wants to be in the loop. So if I really wanted to trust David, I would then fly over to Manchester, meet up with you in person in a coffee shop, and we'd know that we were, living human beings. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. So contrary to what a lot of people are saying that plane travel is going to go down, I don't think it's going to be the case actually in the future.
Well, it's interesting. I think you've seen Netflix. I don't know what their latest kind of stance is on it, but they were talking about their kind of in real life, betting big on in real life experiences, and they were talking about the
Yeah.
kind of drive-through cinemas and whatnot. And I think that's absolutely agree with you that I was actually on a conversation with voice identification founder the other day, and he was talking and he showed me some companies in London that have raised like fantastic funding. But the problem is the difference between the real person and the synthetically sort of like generated video is you can't actually tell the difference between the two.
No.
And the scary thing is, without having these voice identification software or capabilities, or without having verification, you don't know who's true and who's not. So if you
Right.
into this AI that's going off on a bit of a tangent, reading off, is going off script,
Yeah.
regurgitating, as you said, what's the human knowledge rather than the expert in the room who is able to think outside the box. It's it can be incredibly damaging. And I think just from a consumer perspective, when we realize that we're being sold to by AI,
Yeah.
much prefer to see a less polished version of someone in real life because it's that human to human connection rather than thinking we've been tricked.
Exactly.
So, talk to me a little bit about the evolution of the business and some of the
Sure.
pitfalls, challenges that have come along the way.
So let's say the kernel of this idea came back in the mid noughts. And when I was working for Microsoft, and like I told you before, and I kept banging my head against the wall with threat modeling. And I thought it was a great concept, just poorly executed. Great concept, poorly executed. So I started coming up with the ideas. I think there were two problems that I was encountering. Problem number one is the technology wasn't caught up fast enough that I could actually execute upon those ideas the way I wanted to. And when the cloud finally bloomed and blew out, this is my moment. That's when I was able to move in the cloud and make this fully operational and actually make it work the way I wanted to. But back in Microsoft days, and I worked for a couple specialist companies post Microsoft, and they all told me to a T, nah, there's no way you can automate threat modeling. No way you can automate threat modeling. And I was basically like, hold my beer, that kind of thing. And so from that, I talked when I was at Visa for about 4 years as a contractor. And I met this one guy and I talked to him about it. And I said, look, I think I've got this great idea. What do you think? You want to go in as a partner with me? And he's a really intelligent guy. But the mistake that I made like founder mistake number one is I picked two people who are in the same space as opposed to picking a complementary space. So it's a whole yin and yang symbol. Instead of picking two people who are complementary and who feed each other, I picked two of us. We kept on butting heads. And then he said at one point to me, he said, look, he said, I'm not sure about this whole ingesting other people's diagrams bit works. Why don't we just go with creating your own tool? And I said, I don't want to do that. I said, that's not the idea. So then there were a number of other things. And he said, look, he said, let's just part ways. I said, fine. So we bought him out and he left and he's gone on. He's actually running as a senior consultant at one of the major finance companies right now in London. So he's kind of gone old school. He went back to contracting and then kind of went permanent old school and everything like that. And I think that was his thing. I think he wasn't interested in going the same direction. So I went along the sole founder route and picked up a bunch of help along the way and went to Web Summit. I'm sure you've heard of Web Summit. So I went there when they were in Lisbon, 16, fling my product. I found Web Summit frustrating because they shoved me in with all sorts of other startups in this one hall, which happened to be the last hall you go to. So no one went there. You have people wandering through the first two halls, which had all the big companies and everything like that, which you interlaced. They interlaced a layer, like the level one and level two companies, which I thought was brilliant. But then when it took to the startups, instead of putting the startups in and mixing them in between everybody else, so the people would kind of walk by them, they put us all in one end piece. And so you end up getting kind of the dregs of Web Summit coming through, like, nobody's really interested. They just want to kind of look through. And so I found that to be incredibly frustrating. I found it also to be frustrating that I did a pitch there at Web Summit and I came away thinking these guys don't know what the hell I'm talking about. And so I went back and I redid everything and I explained everything in analogies and they still didn't get it. You mean to say it's like doing code review? But there are plenty of code review companies out there. And I said, no, it's not doing code review. It's talking about the design, secure by design. And secure by design was still a relatively new concept then. But now, as you probably know, in the last few years, secure by design has come back with full-throated force, and it's been backed by 30 plus countries out there. Threat modeling is obviously part of it. Defense in depth and all that right there, which I've been screaming about from the hilltops for the longest time. So the reason that we decided to not take any funding when we first went through is initially when I got offers from people to do funding, I got a lot of caveats with it. People were saying like, well, you're gonna do this and this. You're gonna do static analysis. I said, I'm not gonna do static analysis. It's not my company. Well, then we're not interested because we don't know what the hell you do. And I explained it. We do this. We do it at the pre-stage. We do it when the people are planning to do the stuff. And people said like, well, isn't that compliance? Why don't you turn it into a compliance tool? No, that's not the idea. And so I kind of brushed off a lot of these different people. And some people said also, they said, we want 99% of the company. We'll give you the money. And I said, nah, it's still, I know I'm still in ideation, but no, that's not going to happen either. So I stubbornly carried on doing bootstrapping. And at one point, I didn't put the company dormant in company's house, but I pretty much had made the company dormant for a number of years because I went back to contracting. I thought, okay, I'll build up some contracting money and then I'll go back and with that money, then I'll go back to the company. And then we had a child and things kind of priorities kind of changed obviously with that. But when went back, I resurrected the company in 2023 and started building it back up from basically the ground up again. We had a product out there, but I had to do a lot of modifications. Had to do a lot of modifications with the training, building up new training right now. The wonderful thing about AI and agents is that I can get a lot more work done with still a small team that we built up because now we're building out agents to do all our help and everything like that. So we did discuss debt-based financing also, and debt-based financing might have been okay. My wife, who's worked in the city for many years as a funds manager, she said, look, she said, let's do a SWOT analysis of debt-based funding. And she said, the biggest problem right here is if you don't get the traction that you're looking for, the company's done because you won't be able to pay back and you have to declare bankruptcy. And she said, you really want to take that chance. And since it was a non-zero chance and it was actually a fairly big non-zero chance because not many threat modeling companies were out there and there was difficulty in them gaining traction, I decided against it. The one big move that I failed on doing, and I'll tell you this right now, that I should have done, shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? So I don't have any regrets about it, but I should have done is I should have been more aggressive in getting grants for our company than I did. I think the grants would have provided me that lift up and that middle step. So we've now applied for a number of grants. At this scenario right here, it's kind of that I got that middle ground because the grants basically are just given to us and they're given to us no strings attached, but they're a lot more difficult to get. We've applied for them, plus doing the continued bootstrapping and all that right there. Word of mouth, getting interested people involved and everything like that as associates who are willing to help me out in the company, but obviously are not working with the company directly.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So since resurfacing the business then in 2023 and you said relying predominantly on kind of word of mouth, how have you got that word out there and how have you got, taken on these sort of like
Yeah.
that you have got?
A lot of foot traffic. But mostly the word of mouth has mostly been through contacts that I meet either at meetups or people I've known that I've worked with who move into new environments. And then, like, for example, I got contacts at University of Manchester through somebody that I knew that started working at University of Manchester in their tech department, then pulled me in. It's that kind of thing that's helped me the most, where people say, yeah, we recognize you. Okay, well, we'll talk to our people who get you a connection there and maybe and then get a contract there and everything like that. And that's basically how we've been doing it. It's slow, but it's very deliberate because the contacts we make are kind of high quality contacts as opposed to just, the shotgun approach and everything like that. But it is very slow, I've got to tell you.
Yeah. So it's very much that quality over quantity, get them in.
Yeah.
It's slow to start with. And as you're building up, I guess, presumably similar to when you were going back into the contracting world, cash is king. So getting that
Yes.
cash in the bank, presumably that's, the same thing, keeping your kind of cost low, getting that money in the bank. What's then going to be, what's the priorities and the main initiatives then for the business going forward? I know you've not taken money in, so it's probably not blow up and be a unicorn. That doesn't sound like the
Yeah.
model you're going after. But what does the next kind of 3 to 5 years look like? Where do you want to be and how are you going to go about executing that?
It's interesting you say the unicorn bit because, that's one of those things that you go to get bed dreaming like, oh, unicorn, that kind of thing. I would love to obviously have a unicorn company, but of course that comes with its own deals with the devil, doesn't it? So there are the upsides and downsides to that. And I'm not sure that threat modeling, yes, Leo, Titanic, yes. He loves the Titanic too. But I'm not sure if that's a path I really want to take because of the way that threat modeling is set and the way that AI is exploding out right there. So it may still happen. Who knows? I mean, we've got two main competitors, myself, and then a couple other companies that are much smaller that are rising up through that are starting to realize that threat modeling does have something to it. A lot of research out there has said that threat modeling is going to be up to a 75 to $80 billion industry in a few years. So we've just started scratching the surface of this, basically. In terms of the priorities, I've started prioritizing a lot of marketing now. I'm not very good at it. So I'm trying to get people in to help me with the marketing and to kind of drive me forward. I'm good at talking about my product. I guess maybe I'm good at marketing, but I'm not so good at the sales. How's that? And the sales being that closing the deal. And I'll fully admit that. I mean, I'm good at getting out there and explaining my product and being enthusiastic about it because I know what it is. And I know it's solving a problem that has plagued me for a long time and a lot of people I know. In fact, most of the people that I've worked with have had the same problem. So I know it's solving a problem out there. I know the money's out there because I've seen some companies pull in big digits from VCs in the space. So I know that that's out there. So I know it's needed. Now, the next question is, where do I go about taking the amount of money that I have, the cash money that I have, and emphasizing it? Is we've been building up now a marketing space with agents and all that right there to basically make that a lot more fluid. And on the tail end of that, a sales space too. And I'm working with several people to build that up and to get that funnel working. I've got the tech space nailed down. I just have to, then get the time to do it. And then, of course, again, you can do prompt engineering to expand that and make that a lot more flexible and get a lot more done in that area too. So the main choke point again becomes me because so far I haven't trained anybody up to do the delivery of the content during training, and also to get people to come in who can come into the inner circle. I guess part of me is still working off of that being burned by my co-founder in a sense that, do I really want to get somebody else who's highly technical involved in there and then try to warp the ideas? The ideas I think are solid. I mean, I'm not wedded to them 100%, but I think they're solid and I think they still need to be fully tested and fully run through with the customers coming through and providing feedback and then working with the product. I think the idea is a good thing, and I think it also is a good one because I'm seeing my competitors roll over to my ideas. So I obviously know that they're good ideas. They're just way ahead of their time. Okay, Leo, stop, please. And so as a result, I'm going to stay the course, and I'm going to emphasize on the marketing bit. I'm emphasizing more on telling people. Here's what I'm doing right now: is that since 2023, before 2023, I explained the product in terms of security. It is a security product, but it's actually a workflow product because I've worked tons of times as an engineer. I've worked a lot as an actual engineer and then also as a security engineer. So I talk to a lot of these people. The thing they get really pissed off about and get frustrated about is a huge backlog. If they get a huge backlog, they don't feel like they're going anywhere. As an engineer, it's very frustrating. If you disrupt them when they're in the middle of a sprint with, you have to fix this, then they get pissed off. If you disrupt them at the end of the sprint and knock them off their stride, it's things like that. So how do I go about making that a more smooth experience? What causes them pain? Well, one guy said to me during one of the events that I went to, and CogX, that he said to me, we use product X. I'm not going to explain what product we use. We use a security product X, and it adds on average 1 to 2 weeks to our sprint. It doubles the sprint time in finding these problems and solving them. And you're telling me that your product is going to cut that down. I said, yes, what my product will do is we'll find that stuff when you're planning it, and you'll basically, it's kind of, I wouldn't say prediction, but for lack of a better word, it is, will predict what you should put in. If you put that in, you won't find that by this other product because it won't exist. You've already mitigated it. You've taken care of it in the early stages when it's just you and a couple architects, or a couple of people architecting it up, or a couple of engineers architecting stuff up. But when you're actually deploying it and developing it, you won't run into that problem. And you won't have to break things apart and re-put them together because that's the worst possible time to do it. Because when you break things, inevitably everybody else who's got dependencies on you, their stuff will break. And then you'll have a lot of problems. So then the cost goes up, right? The ROI goes down. So what I say now to people is my pitch to all people is, look, you put my product in and the ROI is going to go up because your costs of doing things, your cost of producing and rolling out is going to go down. And also the quality of product is going to go up tremendously. Good security, good quality product. It's that easy. Bad security, crappy product usually. So, I've never, think about this, David. Have you ever seen a really bad product with good security? You haven't, have you? They don't go that way, but a good product will probably have good security. I'm not saying it will, but it probably will.
So it's that, I guess the challenge at the moment from what you've said there is a few things. It's like kind of the positioning. How can you position your product to the highest pain point, the highest, you don't want to get just bundled into a security
It's not just security. Yeah.
problem. Like if you've got developers or engineers, sorry, who the pain's more acute for them and they see security as this roadblock, it slows everything down. Well, how can you set yourself aside and be like, actually, we're not the same. We reduce the time of your sprint and we're not this extra hurdle, this extra obstacle. Furthermore, we can remove this kind of pain of having to stop you mid sprint and
Yeah,
then bake security in or add security
exactly.
at a later point. We bake it in from the start, secure by design. And it's I think that's the genius in, understanding how to position it right, who to sell it to right. And as you said, having been an engineer, actually understanding those problems might be more acute at that level than security, where traditionally you might have been previously selling to. So sounds like an interesting sort of dynamic and challenge then to work that one out.
Yeah, it is. And talking to the right people, I made a lot of mistakes in my previous iteration of talking to the wrong people. I talked to the engineers, and of course, they loved the idea. They didn't have any money. So then I started saying, well, I have to actually move into the C-suite, and I have to talk to the C-suite. They have the money, and they're the ones who make the decisions, or the much higher level managers. You have to, again, another thing you have to be careful about is if you talk to the mid-level managers, they see you as a threat because they say, well, you're going to take away our work, bizarrely enough. And so and I've run into that buzzsaw beforehand too. So you have that balance you have to do. You have to figure out who is my target market, and you can't just scare their pants off with FUD. And that's another thing too is that's why I say we are a security product, yes, but the bottom thing is we're a workflow product. And if you put us in correctly, using even a modicum of what we put in for our consulting, we can give you an idea. You do it right in the beginning, and you isolate the issues to the developers themselves. Think about this. If you're a developer, a lot of times what you do is you'll finish your piece of code and then you try to merge your code in with a greater code base. Or if you're an engineer, doing the same thing with infrastructure as code, you do the same thing. And when you do that merge, let's say I stop you at that merge point as a pull request and I do a review of the code based upon the threat model. And I'm looking for patterns in the merge code that don't exist because the threat model says they should exist. I reject that merge request, sending that single developer back to fix their piece of code, thus isolating it. Now, the developer himself might initially get pretty pissed off, but the payoff down the line is huge because what the payoff is basically they don't merge that code. That code doesn't get, doesn't corrupt other code pieces or other modules that attach to it, thus breaking them potentially either through the security issues or through refixing it, refactoring it. Refactoring costs, don't exist because that person is isolated and changed. And then the next time around, being intelligent human beings, they learn from their mistakes. They say, aha, I know that my merge request failed because I failed to put this in. I'm going to put this in. And they become proactive. And that's a huge step up right there. So they no longer are just like injecting stuff into the center and hoping it works, and then the whole thing breaks. Or from a security perspective, makes it weaker.
So I guess if you were, and this is the $1 million question, I guess if you were able to,
We have to say billion these days, Dave.
yes, absolutely. Looking at the business as it is at the moment and kind of some of these challenges and some of these kind of complexities and hurdles that you're looking to overcome, if you, I guess, were a magician, if you had a magic wand and you're able to kind of fix one thing in the business right now that you think would be catalytic in like unlocking this next phase of growth or overcoming some of the existing hurdles, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. If I could wave a magic wand and put some kind of if I could wave a magic wand, what I would do is I would make the secure by design a lot more front and center, the initiative a lot more front and center. And I would make people's awareness of the Resiliency Act in Europe a lot more front and center. They know about it. The issue with a lot of people in the business sector is they'll toe the line as much as they have to get the work done. But if it impedes them or if they think it impedes them, then they won't do it. Now, the Resiliency Act is going to be compliance. The Secure by Design initiative is just that. It's an initiative. It's, we'd like you to do this. But with the Resiliency Act, it's going to end up being a worldwide law, isn't it? Anybody who wants to operate with the EU is going to have to do it or have to toe the line. Therefore, it becomes a worldwide law and it becomes worldwide compliance. Now, as much as I like to say to you, we're not a compliance tool, well, we would be a compliance tool. So in that case right there, it's a pull through. But then what we want to make sure is we want to also make this thing usable. Now, a compliance tool says you just slap it in. You don't care what the output is. You care what the output is for the auditors, but you don't care what the output is for the business, pretty much. But what we can do is we can say, look, not only can we give you the relief from the auditors, but also the output, we can help you with downstream components. Things that we've helped with in the past and here's where AI becomes brilliant too. And now this is where I love AI, is with the output that we provide. It used to be that it would take a little bit of time to create test harnesses that then the downstream red teamers and pen testers would use. Now with AI, I just give them the output and I say to the AI, build me a test case. Build me several test cases that validate this particular issue or that invalidate or that will help the testers to invalidate that this threat exists. Job done. It happens in a couple seconds, the output right there, and job done. That kind of gives an idea of where we stand and where we're positioning ourselves. Is we're positioning ourselves, yes, secure by design and all that, but quality of products is what we're looking for. If you want to get quality product, we are basically a low friction, low cost approach to doing it. We are building our model on the AWS model. So AWS says we're talking about fractions and everything like that. We're talking about fractional use of the infrastructure that AWS has, or Azure, or GCP, you name it, that kind of thing, Alibaba. So what we do the same things. We say, look, you buy tokens off of us, and these tokens will then allow you to create threat models. And by that exchange right there, we don't lock you into any contract or anything. Although you can do a subscription with us, which gives you it gives you more tokens for a period of time to use than a normal subscription or anything like that. The effect of doing this we um, is that we provide a very frictionless way of integrating in with Tutomatic. You go up, you sign up in Stripe, bang, you're off to the races. You're doing threat models. You contact us, we come in, we help you, we walk you through your first threat model. Got no problem in doing that. Obviously, you're getting some integration advice and all that and guidance, and then we tell you, look, you should put it here, here, and here. If you want a bit more, we come in and we do a session for you. We break down your workflows. We say, here are the points where you should do it. And obviously, the workflows are almost always inevitably different for every company. The same snowflakes, right? But we'll figure out the optimal points to put for integration for the threat modeling, what to do with the output. We'll help companies also. Like one of the cool things is creating the integration components for companies on what to do with the downstream information. The old school way is dump it all into Jira tickets and away you go. But then you've just got more paperwork. The better way to do it is when you understand what the CI/CD is of a company, is you take that machine readable output and you integrate it in, like I said, into the Git flow, where you can stop the Git flow. You integrate it into the shall we say, pipelines. And there are two ways of doing this. There's either creating a pipeline itself, which has all security components, or there's Leo, stop. I'm now starting to get a little bit annoyed. Sorry about that. So the two ways of doing it are to integrate it directly into pipelines, which might be a bit more complicated because you already have functional pipelines out there. And if you put security stuff in and you break the pipeline, usually not a good thing because you piss off a lot of people. The way that we've found it works better is you create a security pipeline. All it does is run security tools, or maybe run one security tool only. You can shut it on and off at will. You can run it as adjacent to other pipelines, and you can have it run as a warning or as we'll shut this pipeline down. A lot more flexible by doing that way, and everything like that. And these are, again, things that we've learned from being out in the field of the best way to go about doing these things. The ultimate goal right here is to maximize the use of the inbound information that comes into the threat model and maximize the use of the outbound information. Let it flow all the way down to the pen testers in a waterfall type scenario, in the sense that pen testing is always a waterfall activity. And there you have a huge range where the threat modeling can positively affect the creation of the IT systems. And that's coding. It's also, as I said, infrastructure, networks, the whole smash. Anything to do with IT. In fact, you could threat model non-IT environments. We don't do that, but I'll bet you, I could retool my tool to do it. But it's optimized for IT, obviously. So when we look at things, here's another interesting thing, David. And I thought about this. About 3 years ago, for a lark, I decided I was going to go back and read old white papers. And you might think to me, I don't have a life. Okay, maybe I don't. But I was going to read old IT white papers, old security white papers that dated from the 1970s and 1990s. And the strange thing is almost to a T, these papers responded by providing security attacks, overall security attack patterns that exist today. They're not new patterns. And this is what I tell during my course. Social engineering has been around for a long time, way before we were alive. I've got accounts of social engineering going all the way back to the Middle Ages and going back to medieval times. Oh, sorry, medieval times, but going back to the Roman times. It's human interaction. Spoofing is an ancient exercise too. You always read about this, where Roman Quintius Publius came forward, but it wasn't Quintius Publius, but he showed us some documentation. That's spoofing. So they're all old, things that human beings do, characteristics that human beings do. So the threat modeling right there isn't a new activity; it's an old activity, just made up for a new environment. I love, by the way, I love bringing my love of history into it. Because what I'll do is, during my course, I'll teach a certain part about these different characteristics, but then bring it back into periods beforehand to show people that it is not a new concept.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. I think we've covered so much off on this episode. I think we should definitely book in another one to kind of carry on the conversation. But I think let's leave it there for now.